the kind you don't remember, the kind who refills your coffee before you notice it's low and disappears before you think to say thank you. She worked the early shift at a diner 3 blocks from the Eastern Wall. Same worn sneakers every day, eyes down, the particular habit of a girl who has been taught that being noticed costs more than it's worth. She was good at it, the disappearing. She had spent 3 years perfecting the art of moving through rooms without leaving an impression. Voice low, steps soft, presence reduced to just enough to be useful and not enough to be remembered. Some girls learn that in school. Thalira had learned it at home, which is a harder classroom with no graduation. At the center of Nocturne's power stood the Obsidian Throne, the most elite vampire club in the Northern Quarter. Aristocratic bloodlines, velvet curtains, locked doors. No human entered uninvited. No human entered at all. Tonight, Thalira Voss crashes through the back door. No knock, no permission. She falls through the frame the way people fall when they've used every last thing they had, just reaching the door. One knee, one palm. The wet slap of her body against stone. It echoes through the room like a sentence no one was ready to hear. Every vampire in the hall goes still. Not from concern, from instinct, because the blood on her face carries a scent none of them have encountered in over a century. Ancient, clean, impossibly luminous. In a room full of predators, a wounded girl smelling like that is either the most dangerous thing in the world or the most tragic. No one moves, except one. The Vampire King rises slowly from his chair. He appears 32. He is 327 in all those years. Through every war, every betrayal, every loss this city has handed him. No one has ever seen him move quickly. A man with that much power has nothing left to prove with speed. But tonight he moves. His crimson eyes flare the moment the scent reaches him. His hand, braced on the armrest, splinters the wood clean through. For 1/2 second, his fangs show. Just 1/2 second. Then he bites down hard on the inside of his own lip, swallows the bloodlust back into the controlled silence where he keeps everything that frightens him. He crosses the room. He does not reach for the wound, does not lean toward the blood. He kneels on the marble floor of his own club, in front of every aristocrat and aide and noble bloodline gathered in that room. The most powerful vampire in Nocturne City goes down on one knee and looks directly into the eyes of an 18-year-old girl who has not yet decided if she is allowed to be saved. His voice, when it comes, is quiet enough that it almost belongs to her alone. Do you know him? Behind her, still standing in the doorway, is the man who followed her inside. Broad-shouldered, trimmed beard. A polite smile that has had 200 years of practice, looking perfectly reasonable. Dravenor Hale reaches into his jacket, produces a folded document, medical, official, stamped. He offers it to the room like this is an inconvenience, not a catastrophe. She's my stepdaughter, he says, pleasantly. She has episodes. Not a single vampire moves to stop him. Because he is known here. Because he has attended events here for decades. Because men like Dravenor Hale have spent their entire lives making sure that the moment anyone looks their direction, everything appears perfectly, flawlessly fine. Thalira's fingers find the floor. She is shaking, not from cold, not from blood loss, from something deeper, the particular trembling of a person who has been disbelieved so many times that they no longer expect the truth to land. She had practiced this moment in her head 100 times. The words, the order, the way she would hold her voice steady. And now that she was here, on her knees, with every eye in the room already sliding back toward him, she felt the old familiar gravity, the pull toward silence, the instinct that said, "They won't believe you, they never do." She looked up at the Vampire King. Something in his face was different from the others. Not softer, just still. The way a person goes still when they are genuinely listening. Not composing a response, not deciding in advance, just waiting. It was the rarest thing she had ever seen in a room full of powerful people. She opened her mouth. "He's been selling me." Her answer changed everything. Not just for herself, for every hidden life, trapped inside a system that had learned to call its cruelty by another name. The room did not breathe. 43 vampires, aristocrats, aides, council observers, standing exactly where they had been standing when Thalira fell through the door. Not one of them moved, not because they were afraid of her, because they were afraid of him. The Vampire King had not looked away from the girl on the floor. His hand was still extended, open, palm up, the way you offer a hand to something that has every reason not to take it. He did not speak again. He simply waited, with the particular patience of a man who has learned that some truths require the person carrying them to find the door themselves. Dravenor Hale cleared his throat from the doorway. "Your Majesty, I apologize for the disruption, if you'll allow me to—" "Marius." The king's aide materialized at his shoulder. "Remove Mr. Hale's access card. He does not leave this building." A pause. Politely. Dravenor's smile did not move, but something behind his eyes shifted. A faint recalculation, the way a man adjusts when the game board changes without warning. Thalira watched it happen. She had spent 3 years reading that face, learning every frequency of its moods the way you learn a weather system you cannot escape. The smile that meant patience, the stillness that meant anger, the particular brightness in his eyes that meant he had already decided what came next and was simply waiting for everyone else to catch up. She knew what that shift meant. He was not done. They brought her to a private room on the upper floor. Warm, dark-curtained, nothing clinical about it. A fire in the grate. A blanket someone had retrieved in a hurry, still folded wrong. A glass of water on the table beside a packet of synthetic blood that the Vampire King set down and then stepped back from, like proximity required her permission. She sat on the edge of the chair furthest from the fire. She did not touch the water. "He's waiting for me to talk." She could feel it. They all wait for me to talk. And then when I do, they use it. She had learned to be careful with her own words, not because she was dishonest, because honesty had cost her before, offered freely, received politely, filed somewhere quiet where it would never be found again. She had learned that speaking the truth was not the same as being believed, and being believed was not the same as being protected. The king sat across from her, not at the desk, not behind anything with authority built into its shape. Just a chair, just a man who appeared to be her older brother's age and was instead older than her country. "You don't have to tell me anything," he said. She looked at him for a long time. "Then why am I here?" "Because you chose to be." He folded his hands. "That door you came through, it locks from both sides. You still came through it." It was not what she expected. She had been ready for a legal disclaimer, a procedural formality, the particular language institutions use when they want credit for helping without the cost of actually doing it. She looked down at her hands. The knuckles were split. She didn't remember that happening. 3 years, she said quietly. "He's been selling me for 3 years. The king did not react the way people react when they are performing sympathy. He did not lean forward, did not place a hand on her shoulder, did not say, "I'm so sorry," in the tone that means I need this conversation to move toward resolution so I can feel better about my role in it. He said nothing at all, for a long moment. And then, "How old were you when it started?" 15. The fire cracked. Outside, rain pressed against the window in long, uneven sheets. "He told my mother I was interning," she said, "learning hospitality. The men who came to the house were business contacts. She believed him." A pause. Or she needed to believe him. I don't know which is worse. The king's jaw tightened, just once, just barely. Did she know? Thalira's hands went still in her lap. I think she knew something was wrong. I think she told herself it wasn't what it looked like, because telling herself otherwise would have required her to leave. And she didn't know how to leave. She said it without bitterness. That was the part that broke something open in the room. Not anger, not accusation, just the flat, exhausted clarity of a girl who has had years to think it through, who arrived somewhere on the other side of needing anyone else to validate what she found there. The king looked at her for a long moment. "You've been protecting her," he said. Not a question. She didn't answer. She didn't have to. The silence held the yes better than any word could. He left the room once, briefly, 10 minutes. When he returned, he brought a second blanket, set it on the arm of the chair beside her without comment, then a small photograph, placed face up on the table between them. A young woman, blonde, sharp-featured, laughing at something outside the camera's frame, the edges soft with age, the color shifted toward amber. "My sister," he said, "Lysandra. She was 23 when I last saw her." Thalira looked at the photograph. "How long ago?" 180 years. He was not looking at her. He was looking at the photograph. The expression of someone who has carried a specific weight till they no longer remember what it felt like to set it down. There was no performance in it, no bid for sympathy. Just the plain fact of a grief that had outlasted everything around it and had nowhere left to go. "I'm sorry," she said. "Don't be." He turned the photograph face down, gently. "I tell you because I want you to understand that I am not listening to you as a formality. I know what it costs to be the person in the room who tells the truth when no one wants to hear it." Something inside Thalira shifted, small, quiet. The particular movement of a door that has been locked so long its hinges have begun to rust. She picked up the glass of water. She drank. It was Marius who knocked. 2 short raps, the king's signal for urgent. Vesperian stepped into the corridor. Low voices, clipped, deliberate. She couldn't make out words, only tone. And the tone was the specific register that precedes bad news delivered carefully. When he returned, the temperature of the room had changed. Dravener Hale is not simply a man with connections. Inspector Vale has confirmed he operates a network, not just you, 8 others. Thalira set the glass down. I know, I've met 2 of them. He stared at her. You knew about the others? I tried to tell someone 14 months ago. Her voice was even, controlled. A council aide. He filed a report. The report disappeared. And the next morning, Dravener told me that if I tried again, my mother would be the one who paid for it. The king stood very still. In 327 years, he had learned to recognize the specific silence that follows a revelation that changes the shape of a problem. When what appeared to be a single wrong reveals itself to have roots that go down further and darker than anyone in the room was prepared for. Who was the aide? He said quietly. Thalira told him the name. The king closed his eyes for exactly 2 seconds. When he opened them, they were the deep, burning red of something very old, finally deciding it has been patient long enough. Just when she thought she could trust again, the past returned. And this time it had teeth. She tried to speak once before, and the system buried it. If you've ever been silenced when you told the truth, drop a 1 in the comments. If you believe she deserves justice this time, drop a 2. The name Thalira spoke hung in the air like smoke. The Vampire King did not repeat it. He didn't need to. It was the name of a man who had attended 3 Vampire Council sessions in the past year. A man who had personally reviewed the intake protocols for the Nocturne Victim Registry. The body responsible for processing exactly this kind of report. A man the king had shaken hands with 11 days ago. He stood there with that knowledge settling into him. The way cold water settles, not fast, not loud, just thorough. Vesperian turned toward the window. Outside, Nocturne pressed on. Rain, neon, the particular indifference of a city that has learned to look the other way. He had governed this place for over a century. He had believed, with the specific confidence of someone who has spent 300 years constructing systems, that the architecture of justice he had built was sound. He had been wrong. And the worst part was not that someone had broken the system. It was that someone had used it, had stood inside its corridors, smiled at its procedures, and turned every safeguard into a door that only opened one way. Marius, get Inspector Vale, not a message, her in person, tonight. The door closed. Thalira's breathing behind him was careful, controlled, the rhythm of someone who has learned not to take up too much air in a room. You're not going to tell me it wasn't that bad, she said. No. Or that the system usually works. No. A long pause. Good, she said. And she meant it. Inspector Elowen Vale arrived in 40 minutes. Short hair, dark coat, reading glasses pushed up on her head like she'd been interrupted mid-paperwork. She had been. She was a witch who had worked Nocturne's criminal infrastructure for 19 years. She had the particular directness of someone who has been underestimated so many times, she has stopped bothering to be polite about it. She sat across from Thalira, opened a small notebook. She did not ask, "Are you sure?" She did not ask, "Is there any chance you misunderstood?" She said, "Start from the first time. Take as long as you need. I will write down everything." The Lyra talked for 2 hours. It was the first time she had ever said all of it in the right order, to someone who did not flinch, interrupt, or reach for an explanation that made it smaller. By the end, her voice was steady. Not because it didn't hurt, because she had finally put it down somewhere that could hold the weight of it. When she finished, Inspector Vale closed the notebook, set her pen down flat, looked at the king. Nightvale Haven, it's not a house, it's a network. I've had a file open on it for 8 months. Unconnected incidents, different jurisdictions, no named central figure. She paused. Dravenor Hale is the central figure. How many? The king said. 8 confirmed, possibly 11, all carrying ancient bloodline traces. He's been selecting for it. Thalira looked between them. What does that mean, selecting for it? The inspector glanced at the king. He gave the smallest nod. Ancient bloodline, Vale said carefully, carries properties that standard vampire blood doesn't. Healing, curse neutralization. Administered to a vampire over an extended period, it can reverse the effects of aging, even in those who absorb it second-hand. Thalira sat very still. He's been using us, not just selling us, using the blood itself, to stay young. 230 years, the king said. He should look 80, he looks 50. That discrepancy has to come from somewhere. Thalira thought about every morning she had woken up in that house feeling drained. Every week she had told herself it was stress, poor sleep. The accumulation of everything. Every time Dravenor had stood close to her in a doorway, and she had felt a pull she could not name. Not fear exactly, not revulsion exactly. Something more like the sensation of water leaving a glass very slowly. So slowly you don't notice until the glass is almost empty. He hadn't just been selling her. He had been drawing on her, slowly, carefully, in ways that left no marks and generated no reports. A long, patient theft built into the architecture of her daily life, so thoroughly that it had taken 3 years to understand it was happening at all. They moved her to a safe house at 2 in the morning. A narrow building 3 streets from the eastern wall, unmarked. The kind of place that exists in every city specifically to house people. The city has not yet figured out how to protect. Marius showed her to a room on the 2nd floor. Clean, a lamp, a window with the curtains already drawn. She sat on the edge of the bed, listened to the building settle around her. The blanket from the obsidian throne was still folded over her arm. She had carried it without thinking, the way you carry something warm when you have not had warmth in a long time, when your hands have not yet accepted that you are allowed to put it down. She set it on the pillow. He brought a second one. She kept coming back to that. He didn't announce it. He didn't make it a thing. He just put it there. 3 years of being managed by a man who had mastered the precise vocabulary of care. Just enough warmth to keep her compliant. Just enough kindness to make the cruelty feel like her own misreading. It had left her with no reliable instrument for measuring what was real. She did not sleep. At 4 in the morning, the window broke inward. She was already on her feet when the figure came through, female, dark clothing, moving directly toward her with the focus of someone given a specific target. The impact drove her back against the wall. She fought, with her elbows, with her weight, with every adaptation of a body that has spent years learning to survive, in spaces where no one was coming. She was losing. The figure was a vampire. The lyra was not. The arithmetic of that had only one outcome. Then the door came off its hinges. The vampire king crossed the room in 2 steps, caught the figure by the collar, pinned her against the far wall. A controlled grip, not violent, the way you restrain rather than punish. Blood had splashed across his face in the struggle. She could see the exact moment the scent reached him, the warmth, the ancient pull. Bloodlust rising like a tide. He did not move. He stood with his jaw locked and his free hand flat against the wall, pressing into the plaster hard enough to crack it. He breathed, deliberately, slowly. The way a man breathes when the alternative is something he has decided, at the level of bone and will, he will not become. The figure in his grip was shaking. Young, female, a face the lyra almost recognized, the edge of a memory, a hallway, a door she had passed years ago without knowing what was behind it. She was one of them, the lyra said. She was one of Dravenor's. She attacked you. She was terrified. The lyra stepped forward. She didn't come here to hurt me. She came because this was the only address she had, and she had nowhere else to go. The king lowered his hand. The young woman crumpled against the wall, put her face in both hands. The sound she made was not dangerous, not monstrous. It was just grief, raw, shapeless. The grief of someone who has been surviving so long they have forgotten what it felt like to simply stop. The lyra knelt beside her. She didn't think about it. Her knees just found the floor. The same floor, she realized, the same posture the king had taken on the marble of the obsidian throne a few hours and a whole lifetime ago. She did not say it's okay. She said, "I know, you don't have to explain anything." The king stood very still above them both. And in that moment, she understood the terrible truth. Dravenor's network had not just stolen years from her. It had taken something from all of them that could not simply be returned. And somewhere in the city, right now, he already knew where she was. They sat on the floor together for a long time. Thalira and the girl who had come through the window. Her name was Sarah. She was 20. She had been inside Nightvale Haven for 4 years, which meant Dravenor had found her before he found Thalira, which meant there was a sequence to how he worked, a patience, a method, a careful cultivation of vulnerability. He had been refining for longer than either of them had been alive. Sarah did not speak much. Thalira did not ask her to. She understood that some things needed to stay unspoken for a little while longer, that not every truth was ready to be named yet, and pushing before the moment was right could close a door that had taken years to crack open. She just sat, present, still, the way the king had sat across from her hours ago in that firelit room. She understood now what that had cost him, the discipline of it, how rare it was for someone with power to spend it on silence. The vampire king stood near the doorway, back to them, giving them the room's privacy without leaving it. After everything that had come through that window tonight, she understood that was its own kind of protection. She doesn't need me to fix anything. He stood with that thought. She needs to not be alone in it. There's a difference. I learned that difference 180 years too late. Marius appeared at the door just after 5 in the morning. The expression of a man who has verified news twice before saying it aloud. The king stepped into the corridor. Dravenor is gone. 4 guards, locked room, no exit. The guards are unharmed and the room is empty. A pause. He left something. A tablet, screen already active, running on a loop. The king watched it for 47 seconds. When it ended, he stood in the corridor, one hand braced against the wall, not for balance. The way you brace when the alternative is showing what just happened to your face. His throat moved. Once, he exhaled through his nose, slow, controlled. And the sound of it in the empty corridor was the only sign of what the video had done to him. Then he straightened, walked back into the room. Thalira, I need you to see something. The video was dark. Stone walls, low torchlight, the cold damp of an underground space. In the center of the frame, chained to an iron chair, was a young woman, blonde, sharp-featured, a face that belonged on a photograph with soft edges and amber color. Older than the photograph, not in lines, not in years, in the eyes. 180 years of waiting had done something to them that could only be described as depth. A darkness that had outlasted everything except the specific, stubborn decision to still be there. She looked directly at the camera. Vesperian, just his name, the way you say someone's name when you have been saying it in the dark for so long that speaking it aloud feels like the first real breath you have taken in years. Save me. The screen went dark. Thalira looked at the vampire king. He was standing very still. For the first time since she had fallen through the back door of the obsidian throne, he looked exactly his age. Not 32, not a king, not a system of controlled restraint. Just a man who had been carrying a specific grief for 180 years, and had just discovered it was not, in fact, a grief at all. His sister was alive. Dravenor had kept her, drawn on her blood for a century and a half, slowly, patiently, the same way he had drawn on Thalira, only longer, without any possibility of escape. 180 years in a basement, calling a name that no one heard, still deciding every single day to still be there. He wants something, Thalira said. Yes, he will contact us with terms. What terms? The king looked at her directly, without the careful distance he had been maintaining all night. He wants your blood, enough to transfer the curse he absorbed from Lysandra. If he can move it into a willing ancient bloodline carrier, it destroys the carrier, but it frees her. A pause. He is offering her life in exchange for yours, and he expects me to make that choice on your behalf. The room held that for a moment, just held it, the weight of it too large for any immediate response. Thalira was quiet for a long time. She thought about the blanket, the second one, brought without announcement, placed on the arm of the chair and left for her to choose. She thought about Sarah on the floor, face in her hands. She thought about her mother across the city, telling herself what she needed to tell herself to keep getting up in the morning. She thought about what it meant to carry light, not to have it given, not to stumble into it, to carry it deliberately, at cost, through rooms that have been dark for a very long time. She reached out and took the king's hand, not to comfort him, not as a transaction, just the way you reach for someone when you want them to know that what you are about to say is your own decision, made clearly, with full knowledge of what it costs. Ancient blood only destroys the greedy, she said. That's what the old texts say, not those who choose compassion. You don't have to. I know. She held his gaze. That's the point. His fingers tightened around hers, just once, the only crack in the composure he had held all night. A man had chased an 18-year-old girl through the rain that night, expecting to silence her. Her answer had changed everything. And now she was choosing, on her own terms, what to do with what remained. The photograph of Lysandra was still in the room behind them, face down on the table, right where the king had placed it gently, hours ago, in a different version of this night. She thought about what it would mean to turn it back over. For the first time in her 18 years, years spent learning to take up less space, to make less noise, to survive by becoming smaller, she knew exactly what she had to do. Inspector Vale found Dravenor Hale at dawn. Not through tracking, not through surveillance, through paperwork. A property filing from 60 years ago. A warehouse in the industrial quarter registered under a name that no longer existed. A chain of transfers so carefully obscured it would have taken anyone else months to untangle. It took Elowyn Vale 4 hours, a cold cup of coffee, and the particular stubbornness of a woman who has spent 19 years refusing to let administrative complexity be mistaken for innocence. He was in the basement. Lysandra was in the basement. The arrest was quiet. No violence, no flight. When Inspector Vale came through the door with 3 council officers at her back, Dravenor Hale looked at the warrant and understood, for the first time in 230 years, that the architecture he had built around himself had finally closed. He had spent 2 centuries constructing a life that looked like legitimacy, and it had taken one waitress, one girl in worn sneakers, who kept her eyes down and had been taught that being noticed costs more than it's worth, to bring the whole careful structure down. He had never accounted for that. He should have. He had designed his system to survive individuals. He had never accounted for a waitress with an unbreakable will, or a vampire king willing to kneel on a marble floor and wait for the truth to arrive on its own. The healing took 3 hours. Thalira sat in a chair beside Lysandra's cot, wrist bandaged, eyes open. She had offered willingly, not under compulsion, not under pressure, with Inspector Vale present as witness and the king standing across the room, arms at his sides, looking at the floor. He had tried one more time. There is another way. I can find Vesperian. She used his name, not your majesty, not the king, just the name his sister had said, through a screen at 5 a.m, worn down to its essential syllables. He went quiet. She rolled up her sleeve. The curse transferred cleanly, ancient blood doing exactly what the old text said, moving through willingness like water finding its level, dissolving in the presence of genuine compassion the way darkness dissolves when you open a curtain. Not dramatic, not violent, just a slow, warm unraveling, like a knot pulled tight for so long that when it finally releases, the relief is almost too large to hold. Dravenor aged in his cell, not violently, just truthfully, all the years he had borrowed, returning to him in sequence, the way borrowed things always return when the person you took them from finally stops carrying your debt. He was sentenced by the Vampire Council to 300 years. The vote was unanimous. The king abstained, not from indifference, from the understanding that a judge with a personal stake in a verdict has compromised the thing justice requires most: the willingness to let truth speak for itself. "You didn't vote," the Lyra said afterward. "The law doesn't need my anger," he said. "It needed my testimony. Those are different things." She thought about that for a long time. Lysandra woke on the third day. Not dramatically. She simply opened her eyes, the same sharp blue eyes from the photograph, from the video, from the amber-edged memory the king had been carrying in his chest for 180 years. She looked at the ceiling for a moment, taking it in. A plain ceiling, a room with a window, the smell of something ordinary, the profound, almost unbearable strangeness of the world being real again. Then she turned her head. Her brother was asleep in the chair beside her cot, fully dressed, head dropped slightly forward, one hand resting on the edge of the mattress near her arm. The unconscious positioning of a man who had sat down intending to stay awake, and had finally, at some unguarded hour, lost the argument. Lysandra looked at his hand for a long moment. Then she turned it over, carefully, and held it. He woke up. He looked at her the way people look when they have imagined a moment so many times that when it actually arrives, the mind takes a second to confirm it is not another version of the same dream. She said, "You're older." He said, 180 years will do that." She laughed, quiet, rusty, the laugh of someone using a muscle that has not been used in a very long time. And something in his face shifted, not relief exactly, not joy exactly, something older and quieter than either of those. Something that had been waiting 180 years just to hear that sound again. He did not speak again for a while. He held her hand with both of his, looked at the window, the first pale morning light of Nocturne City, pressing through the gap in the curtains, gray and soft, completely indifferent to everything that had happened in this room. The way morning always arrives. On schedule, whether or not anyone has earned it. The Lyra's mother came on the fourth day. She stood in the doorway before she came in, a woman in her 40s who carried herself the way people carry themselves, when they have been told for years that their instincts are unreliable. She looked smaller than Thalira remembered. Or maybe Thalira was just seeing her clearly for the first time, not through the eyes of a child who needed her to be more than she was. Just a woman, frightened, ashamed, still standing. Thalira stood up. She did not say it's okay, did not say I forgive you, not any of the shorthand phrases that get used to move past the hard part without going through it. She said, "You were a victim too. I understand now. We're going to have to figure out how to heal at the same time, which will probably be difficult." Her mother put a hand over her mouth. "Yes," she said, "I know." They stood in the doorway together for a while, not embracing yet, but close. The proximity of two people who have been through the same storm from different positions, only now beginning to understand the other's view of it. Then Thalira's mother opened her arms, and Thalira stepped in. 3 weeks after the arrest, the Vampire Council passed a new provision into law, proposed by the king, seconded by Inspector Vale, entered into the permanent record in plain language that left no room for ambiguity. All vampires must hear victim testimony before taking any action. Silence is not consent. Disbelief is not neutrality. Listening is the first act of justice. The council aide who had buried Thalira's original report resigned the following morning. The safe house on the eastern wall was officially registered, funded, named. The house felt different now. Not quieter, not emptier, lighter. The kind of light that comes not from the absence of darkness, but from the deliberate decision, made by more than one person, over more than one night, to keep a lamp on anyway. 3 months after the night she fell through the back door of the obsidian throne, Thalira Voss walked in through the front. Not because she had been summoned, not because she needed anything. She walked in because the front door was the door regular people use when they have a reason to be somewhere. And for the first time in 3 years, she was a regular person with a reason. She was carrying a letter. She had written it 4 times. The first version was too formal. The second was too long. The third said everything correctly and felt like nothing at all. The fourth was 2 pages, handwritten, imperfect, and true. She folded it twice and didn't read it again. She had learned that some things get worse the more you look at them before you send them. The sanctuary had been Lysandra's idea and Thalira's architecture. They had argued pleasantly about the name for 2 weeks. Lysandra wanted something with light in it. Thalira thought names with light in them made promises that were hard to keep. They settled on Nightvale Sanctuary, which kept the darkness in it honestly, while suggesting that darkness and shelter were not, in the end, incompatible. It occupied the safe house on the eastern wall and the 2 buildings adjacent to it, purchased quietly. The deed had arrived in an envelope on Thalira's chair one morning. The address, a key. No note. She had sat with it in her palm for a long time before she understood that was exactly the point. It was hers to use or not use, arrive or not arrive, build or not build, entirely on her own terms. That was what it felt like when help was real. Sarah was already there when she arrived. So were 4 others. Women who had come out of Nightvale Haven's network slowly, tentatively, each one at a different stage of understanding what had been done to them and what, if anything, they wanted to do next. Thalira did not run programs, did not give speeches. She made tea in the small kitchen off the main room and sat with whoever needed someone to sit with. She said I know when she meant it, said nothing when she didn't. She had learned in that firelit room 3 months ago that the most honest thing you can offer someone is not reassurance. It is presence, unhurried, without an agenda. Lysandra brought food on Thursdays, always too much, always in mismatched containers borrowed from somewhere. She had been in the world for 3 months and was still learning which parts of it she trusted. She was doing it carefully, which Thalira thought was the right way. Once, watching Lysandra arrange containers on the kitchen counter with the focused attention of someone performing a task that is also quietly a joy, Thalira thought, that waitress who used to disappear before anyone said thank you would not recognize this room. She was right. She had been that girl. She was not anymore. The letter she left with Marius that evening was 2 pages, handwritten, without a salutation. It read, in part, "You didn't save me the night I came through that door. I want to be clear about that because I think it matters. What you did was ask one question and then wait for the answer. What saved me was that the answer was finally allowed to land somewhere. I'm telling you this because I think you've spent 300 years believing that power means being the one who acts. I think maybe it also means being the one who stops, who kneels, who makes enough room for the truth to walk in on its own. The sanctuary is open, you don't have to come, but the front door is unlocked." She signed it with her name. Just her name. The king read the letter, standing at his desk. He read it slowly, the way you read something you want to make sure you are understanding correctly. Not just the words, but the person behind them. The girl who had fallen through a door in the rain, who had whispered 3 words into a room full of people with every reason to disbelieve her, who had knelt on the floor beside a stranger and said, "I know," without making it about herself. When he finished, he set the letter down beside the box where he kept Lysandra's old photographs. He opened the box, took out the photograph, the one he had placed face down on the table during the worst night of his year, set it face up. Lysandra laughing. Something outside the frame had made her happy enough to look like that. He had spent 180 years not knowing if she was alive. Now she was 3 streets away, carrying too much food in mismatched containers, learning carefully which parts of the world she trusted. Something shifted, small, quiet, somewhere in the region of his chest where he kept the things that were not yet language. Something green, something that had no word in any of the 7 languages he spoke, because it was older than words, and had been waiting longer than any word had existed to name it. She had finally understood, not in a single night, not from one person's courage alone, but from the slow accumulation of small true things. That light does not arrive. It is made, one question at a time, one open door at a time, one person choosing to stay in the room when leaving would have been so much easier. This story reminds us that the most powerful act available to any of us at any age in any room is simply to ask the right question and mean the answer. We may not be kings, we may not carry rare gifts in our blood, but most of us know someone who is tired of being managed instead of heard, someone who has been explaining themselves for years to people who were already composing their response. The next time that person is across the table from you, a grown child, an old friend, someone you have known so long you think you already know what they will say. Try setting down what you were about to say. Try asking one question. Try waiting for the answer the way you would wait for something you genuinely did not know. That is not a small thing. In the right moment, it is everything. If this story stayed with you, drop a comment below and tell us, what's the one question you wish someone had asked you? We read every single one. A real person poured sweat, tears, and sleepless nights into building this vampire world. Every inner conflict and cursed love belongs to a human heart. AI only assisted in a very small way to help deliver the story to you completely.